This is Unit 4, Week 1, question sort of 0 reformers, in this case abolitionists, those who wanted to abolish slavery. The first one would be Benjamin Lundy, and he's up on the top. Benjamin Lundy was founded the Union Humane Society of Ohio in 1815, a newspaper publisher. Strong influenced John Quincy Adams. William Lloyd Garrison, probably one of the best known abolitionists. My great-great-grandfather was named William Lloyd Garrison Haskins after him, telling you about the abolitionist position of my ancestors. He founded a newspaper, The Liberator, in 1831, and the poorly named in an acronym Anti-Slavery Society in 1833. He was very radical, nearly lynched in Boston. His was Action Now. Sarah and Angelina Grimke, two women who were born into, they're white women, who owned property, were born in as slave owners in the South. They were from South Carolina. They were from a very wealthy family. They rejected the notion of owning people. Imagine that, radical, of course. But they moved into the North. There was a price on their head. They were banned from traveling in the South. They both wrote impassioned speeches, essays about the horrors of slavery, and were able to speak to it from a position of experience. And Angelina later married Theodore Weld. Theodore Weld, an abolitionist, suffragist. He helped found Oberlin College as one of the first universities in America that openly accepted men and women and blacks before others. He wrote a book that influenced Harry Beecher Stowe, writing Uncle Tom's Cabin, lecture organizer Gabriel Prosser, and Denmark Vesey. Late 1700s, very early 1800s were the first of these that led abolitionists, now we're talking African Americans, who led protests. They were, one led a rebellion of 1,000 slaves. Rain delayed them, and they were turned in and betrayed by two others. Prosser and 34 others were hung. Vesey was a free black insurrectionist, wanted to cause upswinging, violence, troubles, problems. He purchased his own freedom in 1800. In 1822, he planned a revolt in Charleston, South Carolina, 9,000 people, 9,000 slaves. The plot was discovered. He and 35 others were hung. Both of these guys are what really inspired fear in white Southerners, that if there were those amongst the blacks that would actively organize others, there'd be huge problems. But none of these scared Americans quite like Nat Turner. Nat Turner led a rebellion in 1831 with 60 followers, and 60 white men, women, and children were killed, hacked up. He was captured and hung in November 1831, but Virginians blamed one thing. He was literate. He'd been trained and educated to read and write. And it really began a movement in the 1830s, 1840s to firm up laws in states banning education and access to information for slaves, because there was such a fear that if they were educated, they would communicate with others and network and cause more of these violent uprisings. Paul Cuff, earlier, late 1700s, very early 1800s, was a black sea captain, unusual for a man of means and position, a Quaker philanthropist as well. Quakers in particular were one of the most passionate supporters of abolition. And Quakers are passionately against war. They're conscientious objectors against slavery. So many Quakers were leading abolitionists. Anyways, Paul Cuff was instrumental in getting blacks, males anyways, the right to vote in Massachusetts in 1783. He organized and advocated a resettlement to bring blacks back to Africa. Not very realistic, but part of the movement of, well, let's take these horrible condition of former slaves and return them to Africa. David Walker, finally, a black abolitionist, active speaker, publisher in various journals and papers, wrote the nation's first black newspaper, the Freedom Journal. He published an angry, militant sort of passion speech, an essay called An Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World. He was banned in many southern states. There was a price on his head. He also sold used clothes, and he hid information and map about how to run away for slaves in the South in his used clothes he sold in the South. Finally here, Harriet Tubman, known by everyone, leader of the Underground Railroad, helped over 200 or 300 plus people, slaves, escape out of slavery, as she kept going back to help them, lead them between safe houses on their way, not just to the north, but all the way into Canada. There was a huge price on her head if she was ever to be captured. And Frederick Douglass, passionate, elegant speaker, himself escaped out of slavery, settled in Baltimore, became a very celebrated, educated speaker and orator. He's the first African American invited to the White House during the Civil War. And finally, Sojourner Truth, a black woman, former slave, with her famous tagline, "And ain't I a woman?" speaker for the impoverished and for African American women, not just abolition of slavery itself. All of these are a number, and there are many, many more passionate abolitionists who are leading more and more of an attention and movement to eventually bring the issue of abolition to a head in America, which of course is a heavy element that leads into the slavery and leads into the Civil War. By the way, most Americans were not abolitionists. These were the radical exceptions. And that's it from some guy in an aloha print shirt.